Hi, I'm Tom Field, Senior Vice President of Editorial with Information Security Media Group. My topic today is zero standing privilege, how to achieve it. My pleasure to welcome to the virtual studio, Tim Keeler. He's the founder and CEO of Remedian. Tim, thanks so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. A pleasure to be here.
So Tim, to start the conversation, what's wrong with how we traditionally have approached privileged access management, especially in today's environment?
Well, for me, it's really about recognizing how breaches are happening today and how we've been trying to solve this over the last 20, 25 years. And this is kind of, this really comes from my life as an incident and response handler. And, the way we're trying to implement privilege access controls and security has been traditionally through the password vault method. And while there's a lot of valid use cases for your password vaults, we really have to recognize how attackers are breaking into networks and harvesting and compromising credentials and using the credentials to laterally move around the network. And fundamentally what it comes down to is recognizing and understanding where accounts have administrator level privilege. And especially if you're a large enterprise dealing with a very complex network, you have to understand that that's changing on a regular basis. So even if you have a password vault in place, it doesn't mitigate all the IT administrators that have access. And that's what attackers are exploiting today.
Tim, we hear an awful lot about socially engineered attacks or ransomware. From your perspective, post-COVID, what are the breach trends that you're seeing and how do they involve privileged accounts?
Yeah, so if we take a look at what's happened since COVID has started, we've seen a 148% increase in the amount of cyber attacks that's being launched, especially in large corporations and financial-based attacks. So, just firsthand, I've seen a lot of increase in ransomware attacks, and credentials is actually a key part of that. Traditionally thought of like, hey, if you have a backup mechanism or, an EDR solution that you're completely solved. But what we're finding out through these attacks is, the piece of malware will get installed on a system, and then they'll actually start using credential harvesting methods to use valid credentials to propagate around the network. And that's kind of the troubling aspect is it's really hard to detect when you actually have valid use of credentials. And it just seems like, hey, this is a legitimate software that's being installed.
I want to get to your concept of zero standing privilege, but first let's talk about standing privilege. What exactly is it and what is its role in an attack?
Yeah, so zero standing privilege it's really rooted in the concept of least privilege, which is something that we've been preaching in the industry for a very long time now. When you take a look at most organizations, IT administrators generally have 24/7 access to lots of systems on the environment. And in a lot of cases, it's, they net access to everything. And this applies to server administrators, your IT help desk, workstations, and this just sprawls out of control. And when you actually talk to the IT administrators, they're generally just logging into a small number of systems at any given time. And so what zero standing privilege is all about, it's about reducing a lot of that risk because when we have everyone with access to everywhere, it becomes completely unmanageable. And zero standing privilege is about removing that access and making that dynamic.
So Tim, back up a minute and talk to me about standing privilege. What's the role of standing privilege in an attack and zero standing privilege in a defense?
Yeah, so with standing privilege, typically if you log into any workstation or server, you look in the administrators group, you're going to have the different accounts that are there. It might be a combination of local accounts, domain groups, which is where a lot of organizations get into trouble because you can have a lot of nested groups and that infers lots and lots of privilege that can often be unintended. And so those accounts are the ones that have persistent admin privilege, and that's what we call standing privilege in the environment. So when we start moving to this concept of zero standing privilege, it's about understanding which accounts absolutely need 24/7 persistent admin privilege and minimizing those accounts as much as possible. All the others we can start removing. And kind of the goal and the concept around this is to have zero standing privilege, meaning no accounts on all the systems on the network should have persistent admin privilege. So looking at this from a defense perspective, if you have this control in place, you dramatically reduce or completely eliminate the risk of lateral movement when an attacker has valid credentials and they're trying to authenticate to systems on the network. And that's really differentiating between authentication, which is what password vaults are designed to help solve, versus the authorization, understanding what accounts have privilege on what systems. And really, this is like the philosophy for us is, and we have to ask ourselves and understand, how do we put effective security controls if we assume that an admin level credential is going to be compromised? Because I think in this day and age, we all recognize that admin credentials are going to be compromised, whether it's a phishing attack or other clever means that attackers use.
Tim, one of the things that makes Remediant unique is your just-in-time approach. Can you describe that for me, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a real key principle of writing off of zero standing privilege. It's like, okay, if you're taking away everyone's access, how do you actually give access to the administrators when they need to do their job, whether it's troubleshooting a server or workstation or any of the many tasks that IT administrators do. So really this concept of just-in-time administration that we came up with was making this completely dynamic and tying this in with strong authentication. So if you're an IT administrator and need to log on to server A or server B, you go through our portal, you log in with two-factor authentication, and then you request access to the system that you're trying to log onto for a certain period of time. So if you need access to a server for 4 hours, we are specific about granting that account administrative level privilege on that specific system. So rather than giving access to lots of systems, we're making it as dynamic and time-based as possible. And this way, it's really, really hard for an attacker to know exactly, okay, where does that account have administrative level privilege, especially when it's time-based.
Tim, I want to bring it back to your customers. What is Remediant doing for them, your customers, to help them achieve this zero standing privilege that we've talked about here today?
Well, for us, it's really about adding value to the customer and helping them deal with just this complexity of environment. So it's really about creating, a technology that gives you visibility into administrative level privilege. And this is not just something that you run once a quarter or once a year. This is all about continuous discovery, because Active Directory groups are constantly changing, and systems on the network are constantly changing as it relates to admin privilege. So creating that visibility is really important. And then second, leading into that just-in-time component of, hey, we can actually make this all completely dynamic, but most importantly, the time to deploy is a real key value for us. So we don't have to deploy agents out to systems. We have a very high performant technology that is able to handle systems, even if you have hundreds of thousands, all very, very quickly. So the time to value is a really important. Deployment speed, being able to understand where administrator accounts are, and then help you put the controls and policies in place to reduce that and apply just-in-time administration.
Well said, Tim. I appreciate your time and insight today. Thanks so much.
Yeah, pleasure. Great talking with you, Tom.
Again, the topic has been zero standing privilege, how to achieve it. I've just been speaking with Tim Keeler. He is the founder and CEO of Remediant. For Information Security Media Group, I'm Tom Field. Thanks so much for watching us.